I'm really excited to introduce our speakers. Christina Coraglio is the Senior Manager of Product Development and Strategy with HelloFresh. One of my favorite ways to avoid the pressure of what are we having for dinner tonight. So thank you so much for that. Christina started off her career in accounting with a specialty in tax consulting prior to making a career change to brand management. She spent several years managing multi-million-dollar brands at major CPG companies before most recently moving into the food tech space by joining the product development team at HelloFresh. Christina is the first generation American and first in her family to pursue higher education in business, and is therefore passionate about helping to mentor the next generation of young leaders in navigating educational and professional aspirations based on her experience across several industries. So welcome, Christina. Christina will be joined in conversation with our own amazing Sen Maya. So take it away, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. Hello, Christina.
Hi, thank you, Meg, as well. Thanks for that great intro. How are y'all doing today?
I'm doing good. So glad to have you with us speaking at our summit today, Christina. And this topic, non-linear career paths, I mean, it's so close to my heart. Being someone who transitioned from web development to community management, DevRel, and now program management, I just totally connect with it and the problems that I faced along. So tell us more about you, Christina, and tell us more about your career journey.
Sure. So I think Meg did a really good job. I'll just touch on a few of those points again. So as she mentioned, I'm first generation American, born to two immigrants. My father was from Argentina and my mom from Vietnam. And I know a lot of the attendees today are women, are non-white identifying. So I definitely empathize with much of the experiences I'm sure you all have had as you navigate the professional world. I grew up outside of Chicago in Naperville. I attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for undergrad, and I majored in finance and in Spanish. And then I worked in Chicago for about 3 years at a mid-sized accounting firm where I specialized in corporate property valuation to consult on personal and real estate property tax. Wasn't really enthralled by that line of work, which I can go into in a little bit more detail. But I kind of hit pause after 3 years and was just reflecting on what I actually wanted to spend my time at work doing and decided to go to business school. I went to Kellogg at Northwestern University, and then that's where I made the decision to switch into brand management. So interned and worked in brand for about 3.5 years at CPG companies like Procter & Gamble and SC Johnson. And then as Meg mentioned, just most recently, earlier this year, made another pivot into more product strategy for HelloFresh, so within the meal kit industry. Something I'm super excited about. I'm very passionate about food and cooking, but it's also a role that I think allows me to focus on the physical product offering like I have in my past, but also now in the tech and digital space as well. So really excited to be here and just to talk to you all more about
Totally. Wow, what a star-studded resume that is. I mean, I was just counting the brands that you pivoted through. So great. So why? I mean, what was the rationale behind, or in simple words, what made you change your path from tax consulting to brand management? Or what was that moment that just piqued your interest? Like, okay, this is not for me, and brand management, that's the way to go. So what was that eureka moment for you?
So honestly, simply put, I was looking at my managers and at their managers, and I just realized I didn't want to have what they had. And I mean that in the sense that I started to look at, you know, like the types of projects that they oversaw, their roles and responsibilities, and how those evolved over time, as well as just like their work-life balance. And it didn't excite me, and it didn't align with what I wanted for myself and what I think I envisioned my career trajectory to look like. And I think, you know, like the cruel reality is that we spend so much of our lives at work. And especially coming from tax, it was a field where there's a busy season, just given filing deadlines. And so there were portions of the year where I was working nights and weekends. And I realized that I only really enjoyed the work because of my coworkers, which I think is really important, but it wasn't the actual work that I was doing. And I knew it would be hard for me to remain focused and motivated that way. And so like, to be frank, I was more so pushed out of my first job than I was pulled into brand management. I think it was that I realized what I didn't want and what I didn't like before I started thinking about what I actually wanted.
Totally. I totally get it. I mean, yeah, from standing from an outside, it all looks starry and blinky. That okay, so many big jobs, so many big titles. So you must have faced so many challenges in getting through these big companies, big titles, big roles, and not to mention pivots. So what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you manage your way through it? How did you pave your way into it? Tell us more about that.
I think, being completely candid, like one of the things that I have worked consistently on for myself throughout my life as a young adult is just my confidence and the fact that I do belong in certain rooms and that I do deserve certain roles and opportunities. And part of that is representation and not always seeing yourself in these senior leadership roles. But I think making a career switch and going into a new industry, to me, I told myself I need to build credibility in this new space. And I think I was very hard on myself and thought about it, honestly, maybe a little too surface level at first. I was like, oh shoot, like I spent all of college and like the first 3 years of my career studying and practicing very analytical spaces. So I can talk finance and accounting all day, but now that I want to go into brand, like there's inner voice was telling me, you didn't take enough marketing classes, you didn't spend a lot of time evaluating creative, even though honestly, I would find that those were the parts of my new role that I enjoyed the most and that I excelled at. But I think I got in my own way at first. And we hear about this sometimes with women, especially, and it's an overgeneralization, but I know it was true for me, that I would be job searching and I would see like one bullet point on a job description that I wasn't able to fulfill, and I would write the whole thing off.
Totally.
And I think I eventually overcame that by speaking to and networking with enough people who were career switchers, which is very easy to do when you're starting to network for business school because most people career switch. But also, like, why I'm excited to be here today is to address it through forums like this. But it's like the concept of transferable skills and realizing that so much of what you need to succeed in a role, you will learn on the job. So many companies today have their own processes, their own language and acronyms, and their own way of doing things that it's more so just giving yourself the confidence to believe you do have a strong enough foundation to build off of, and that, the hiring process can be determined just as much, if not more, depending on the company or industry, on your potential as it is on like your actual technical experience.
Totally, totally. And I totally agree with the fact that you share, right? I have read a Glassdoor review or Glassdoor report that 70, I mean, women are more likely to, mentally disqualify themselves from a job that when they see that, okay, these 3 pointers, I'm not getting qualified for them, and men just go anyway and apply for this. And this is definitely a mental blockade that we need to work towards. And talking about resumes, as you mentioned, right, you were the person who was good with numbers, who can crunch numbers. You had an analytical brain, and converting that into a marketing mindset, like where you have to brief out product stories, give out presentation and everything. So how did you, create your resume for this different role while pivoting, and what are some of the pointers? Because, nowadays the ATS, before your resume even lands in front of an actual person, the ATS skims it, and, most of the candidates are discounted by the ATS itself. So how did you make sure, and what was your process for crafting the resume that helped you in pivoting?
Yeah, I love this question because it took me a really long time to learn how to craft it the right way. I think going back to my point on transferable skills, it's about taking out the specific industry jargon that you utilize sometimes to describe what you do in your role, and think instead about what the core skill is that you are exemplifying. I think a very easy example is that in my first role in tax consulting, I spent a lot of time digging through data, analyzing data, and making a recommendation based off of that. And going into brand, I found I also have to analyze data on a monthly cadence. The data is different. It's related to market share, how my competitors are performing, how like my promotional levers performed, but I still needed to make a recommendation based off of that information. So at the core of it, I'm showcasing the same skill. I'm showcasing that I have the ability to take large amounts of data, analyze it, synthesize it, and then provide a takeaway to my stakeholders that results in an action. Like that's the skill to focus on, versus sometimes I think people take up space in their resume by utilizing very specific jargon that doesn't translate well. So I like to encourage people to remember, like, your interviewer for your new role a lot of times isn't familiar with the space you're coming from. So how do you translate your resume to be one that just reads in a more easily understood fashion? I think I learned a lot of that too, because I was and still am an admissions interviewer for Kellogg. So I hear a lot of stories about career switching. And when you're on the other side of the table, it's when you start to realize how simple a story can be when it's done well versus not. When it's done well, I could be interviewing a military veteran applying to Kellogg who wants to move into consulting. I obviously don't have any experience with the military, but I can still clearly see how they would excel and could demonstrate leadership opportunities because they have simplified their message that way. So sometimes it is like just as simple as showing your friends or family your resume, or giving them your elevator speech and just asking them, like, was that all clear? Or did I use any language that maybe you're like, what does that mean? Like, what was that acronym you just used? So that was like big learning number one for me. I think number two, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, that is a tip I learned in my most recent job search, is that you do qualify for more roles than you probably think, but you might not be finding those roles just by the nomenclature of the position. So like what I mean by that is I was submitting a lot of my resumes on postings that I saw on LinkedIn, and my resume at the time said brand manager all over it because I came from CPG and that was the nomenclature we would use for the role that I was in. But the roles that I were applying for, they were asking for product manager. And it sounds really simple, but to your point, like there are softwares that companies use and algorithms within that software that help them to just sift through the mass amounts of applications they receive to find the recruits that are the most qualified. So I can easily be sifted out of that search if my resume doesn't mention product anywhere.
Those particular words.
Those particular words, because I would be using brand in that space. And it translates the same way. Like I'm in product management now, but I'm coming from brand management. And it's a very small tweak that makes, I think, a big difference. So my advice is, like, if you're looking at a job description and there are certain words or terms that are utilized often in that description, you should be looking at your resume and seeing if your resume also mentions those terms. Now, like, obviously don't lie and don't incorporate things that you can't truthfully claim, but I think that there's an art to just how you reword or reframe your experience, because at the end of the day, it goes back to just like the core skill that you are showing.
Totally. And I totally agree with the fact that, stories can be so powerful. And just like Steve Jobs mentioned, the dots should connect. And your story should be connecting all the dots in all the accomplishment that you have done in your lifetime, or, all the jobs that you have switched. So all the dots should be connected in your story. And by the way, we are having, the chat section is buzzing with questions. So why don't I quickly take some questions? So Joyce asks, do you think going to a business school gives you an advantage into pivoting into your career in brand management?
I am really glad that that question was asked. I would say, full disclosure, grad school, higher education, particularly business school, it's not for everyone. I would caution people that use it to fall back on and think that it's crucial for them to make their next move. I think people utilize business school for a lot of different ways, and there's merit for many of them. It could be that you have a liberal arts background and you want a business curriculum to be able to move into that space. It could be that you do want a career switch and you want to network into that, and that it's just harder maybe to break into a field where you're finding that those companies are heavily recruiting at business schools and you really think it can help you get your foot in the door. You have to be really honest with yourself about where you are, where you want to be, and how you build that bridge. And if you can't synthesize why you need an MBA, why you need it now, why you need it at that particular program, and why you wouldn't be able to build that bridge without it, don't force yourself into this situation. And like, I think that, it's a very big financial commitment for you to fall back on. So like, I really encourage like heavy networking. And like, for me, when I was looking at business schools, I I traveled a lot. Like I was grateful that my mom at the time was working for an airline. So I used her benefit to fly to every conference that I could because I wanted to be there. I wanted to speak to students. I wanted to make sure that I was taking out loans for the right reasons and that I couldn't get to where I wanted to maybe without it. I loved business school. I had a really great experience, but I don't think that it is necessary to succeed in life. I think there are so many different opportunities that allow you to learn and to navigate new industries. But it just really, you have to be very honest with yourself on whether you need it or whether you think you need it.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback that question on top of the previous question that, going on to so many debates about whether there's ROI into joining a business school or not. I mean, financially. So yeah, I mean, you totally answered it that you need to do your due diligence and whether or not the B school is right for you. So Carolyn asks, what are some ways to make your resume show how your career pivots are incredibly valuable for the role that you're trying to earn? I'm very good at making these connections clear in cover letters and in-person interviews, but my resume seems to fail the automated reviews, the ATS, before a person at the company gets to see it, the infamous ATS.
Well, that's exactly the program I would utilize. So my career management center at Kellogg gave me a program that allowed me to upload the job description that I was looking at and then upload my resume. And it was a quick analysis of, again, the terms that were being used, the way that they were asking for certain skills, and making sure that I was translating my resume in that way. Don't use acronyms, don't use specific platforms or softwares that you're using that you would never utilize in this new role. I think people miss out on the fact that we look at resumes, again, from the other side of the table when you're scanning it, don't sleep on metrics, on quantifiable metrics. Your resume should have literally 50%, 1.2 million, whatever the impact that you had on a certain project or role that really shoots out and draws their eyes in, because it's really easy to be sucked in a sea of words. And it's hard for them to see okay, well, what's the impact? What's the takeaway here? What can I expect this person to do? In the cover letter, when you're talking, that's why I believe so much in networking and putting yourself out there and talking to people at companies or schools that you're interested in, because it has to be personal. It has to be it shows that you did your research, that you really understand what it is about this company that is unique to you versus any other company in the industry, and how you can uniquely add value to it. So I think having those tidbits within your cover letter, it just helps them show okay, this person's serious about the job search.
Yeah. So before we move in further with the questions, I had this question of how do you manage these phases, pivoting, getting into a new school, or trying to get into a new job? These are all stressful junctions of your career. So how did you manage to keep your sanity and be laser focused to your goal while being sane? And add to this the impact of COVID. These are challenging times. So how did you manage your cool and how did you pave your way through it?
Yeah, I think going back to my point earlier about building my confidence, I think that has been something that's always the spotlight is on that when you're going through the career search. Nobody likes rejection. You're really putting yourself out there. You're really thinking about, if you're qualified or not. And it's really easy to focus on what you're not good at or what you're unqualified for. A lot easier to ignore what you're great at and what you bring to the table. What's worked for me, a couple tips is, even outside of the job search, anytime I receive positive feedback from a manager or senior leader, I save that in a folder in my inbox. And it helps me sometimes on days just to go back and read that and say, okay, remind yourself that you add value here and that somebody has seen that in the past. I keep a running tally of projects that I work on and the impact that I've had in that, again, for the resume. Also helps with writing your self-evaluation at the end of the year. But it just reminds you of how much you've done. So I think the theme for me is I like to keep things in writing, because if I'm having an off day where I'm I haven't heard back from any jobs, I didn't get that second interview, sometimes it's nice to just give yourself that boost and remind yourself that, you are a badass, you can do this. The right opportunity is waiting for you. Sometimes I have friends who they rely on daily affirmations. They stare at themselves in the mirror and they say a certain thing every morning, or they have a post-it note on their mirror. I think you need to find what works for you. And I think lastly, I would just say, don't forget where you came from. I think a lot about how so much of what I have accomplished or what I have today, I used to dream about it. Like I used to pray to get into Kellogg. I used to pray to like get this role in food that's like now a hybrid of things that I'm good at, that I'm also passionate about. And it's really easy to forget how far you've come because you're so focused on what you want next. And so reflection, I guess the theme would be is really key for me in those moments, is just like reflect on who you are and what you can bring to the table.
Totally. I mean, we take it for granted. Once we achieve it, we take it for granted for some time. But then you just have to remember the nights you prayed and the tears you cried to get those opportunities. So yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. I mean, having been at the place where I have tried for opportunities and I've tried at rejections, I mean, you totally take it for granted when you receive it. So yeah, moving forward to take the questions, Pooja asks, what specific skills do you look out for while you recruit your team? Wow, people want to get into HelloFresh.
So the reason I said earlier that I lean on potential more than experience is because, well, I would say specifically with that, I lean on potential with technical experience because that can be taught. It's the soft skills that I think are the most important. I'm very much somebody that I believe in like being in the trenches with my teammates and like, really rolling our sleeves up together and working close with one another. So like I want somebody who is willing to bring new, fresh ideas to the table, like somebody who's not scared to challenge how things have been done. I think being at HelloFresh has been really interesting for me because we're at this inflection point where we're not a startup quite anymore, but we haven't scaled to be as much of a corporation just yet. So there's a lot of opportunity to just challenge the way that things have been done and to bring fresh ideas to the table. And that's actually why I love looking for career switchers, because you don't want to build a team where you all have the same past experiences and you all approach the problems the same way. If everybody came to brand management that had been from accounting, we would probably all look at the data the same way and analyze it and approach it the same way. So I think it's really important to talk about the times in which you have taken your perspective and challenged the way a thing has been done. Another thing that I look for is just solution-oriented individuals. So obviously there's always going to be issues that come up, new problems or obstacles to face. I don't want to just have a team member who comes with me and like alerts me of the problem. That's important, but like, what do you think we should do about it? Did you at least come with a perspective on what could be a solution, or are you just, issue focused, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. We have a host of new questions lined up. So Sunny Miller asked, in my previous role, I was able to include numbers in my resume, but now I'm in education and I don't have quantifiable experiences to include. What do you suggest in this case?
So I think sometimes I encourage people to really dig deeper in it, because just because something doesn't look like it's quantifiable on the surface doesn't mean you can't quantify it in some way. So like, for example, I think, if I'm going to totally make up an example here because I'm not familiar with this like space, but if you are in education and you were able to say like, I mentored 3 students to like apply to this program and like there was a 95% acceptance rate. It can be something like that where you're finding a way to quantify it so that it pops on the page. At the end of the day, I think it's more important though to make sure that you're finding that bridge between the skill on the job description and the skill you're trying to talk about. If you can't throw like percentages and dollar signs on a resume, don't force it, obviously. Focus more on like making sure that you're answering that job description. But I think because hiring managers get so many different resumes on their table, if there is a way for you to succinctly show your impact, it just really helps, because then throughout the interview, they can quickly look at that bullet point because that number caught their eye and they can ask you about that. So I would prioritize, especially the projects where you're like, oh, I can speak the most about this. If they ask me about it, like I can go into detail. Make sure you try to quantify those first. It's okay if you can't quantify everything.
Totally. Now, Carolyn and Jenny have a similar question that most of tech companies and companies ask for prior experience. So what's your take on part-time opportunities, and how can somebody break into a non-familiar space? Like, for instance, if somebody from a non-tech background, how they can break into SaaS or any such space without any experience?
Yeah, so I think this comes a lot up, like for example, in business school when people are applying and they're like, I don't have any experience in this in business space, for example, or like maybe they took the GMAT and they didn't perform very well and they're really freaking out about how to showcase that they have analytical or quantitative abilities. I think it's just about, okay, like what can you do on the side to show that you're at least putting in the effort to excel in that space or to try to get yourself a little further along. And that could be doing like online courses in accounting or finance or econ. You don't have to show them like, oh, I aced this test, but like people like to see effort. People like to see, again, going back to potential. I also think networking is just slept on sometimes. Like networking has been so huge for me. I don't love to network. I am an introvert more than an extrovert. So it does take a lot out of me to get myself to a networking event and to make the most of it. But it's been in those moments that I have learned the most. Like if you're looking at a networking event, you find someone who is in a role that you want to be in or at a company that you want to be in, you should be coming and like, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. You should be asking questions, but then you should be stepping back and allowing them to answer because you want to learn about how they got there and you want to be able to get the most information from them. People love to talk about themselves. So if you give them the space to do it, you can learn a lot. And sometimes they can give you a lot of great advice about what they did to enter the space and, what extracurriculars they were involved in to just help them learn.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good, Christina. Now, as the clock is ticking, it was so nice to have you talking with us, and the audience was super excited as well. I've never seen such a barrage of questions on such different topics coming in way for any speaker. So yeah, that was really great. And it was so nice to have you, Christina, with us. Hope you had a great experience. Thank you.
I did. Thank you so much for having me.
Over to you, Meg.
Thank you so much, Maya, as well as Christina. That was a really great chat to get to sit down. So thank you both so much.